welcome to another episode of the Growing On podcast. I'm your host, John Holcomb, and I am so glad that you have decided to join me for the next little bit. Now, full disclosure, the topic you'll be hearing about in this episode isn't one that is super fun, and that topic is succession planning, specifically farm succession planning. Again, not a super fun topic, however, it is a necessary one, and is something everyone should be thinking about, right? As you'll hear in just a bit, whether you are someone that's close to retirement or someone just starting out with a small family, this is an important topic, and hopefully this episode will at the very least inspire you to at least begin to think about it. Now, without further ado, let's dive on into this episode's discussion right after this message from GFB President Tom McCall.
Hey y'all, the Georgia General Assembly has convened again in Atlanta, and because Georgia Farm Bureau is the voice of Georgia farmers, we at the state capitol every day standing for farming families across the state, just like we've done since 1937. Our mission in Georgia Farm Bureau is to work with elected officials by ensuring farmers are able to produce exceptional products that feed families in Georgia and around the world. Our commitment has always been to the producers in our state, enabling them to provide safe, fresh food and fiber that we all need to survive. Thank you for supporting Georgia Farm Bureau, and if you're not a member, consider becoming one now. Visit gfb.org and look for the Join Today button. Thank y'all again.
All right, I am happy to be here with Brian Bojo. Brian is an attorney here in the great city of Rome, Georgia, in Floyd County, where he is a partner at MSP Law Firm. Brian, estate planning. Let's jump right on in. For someone out there listening that may not fully understand what that encompasses, give me an idea of what estate planning looks like for a general farming operation out there.
Sure. Yeah, great question. We see estate planning as a practice area in law. People ask, well, what does that mean? And it's related to the idea that there's a 100% death rate in society. Everybody's going to pass away. In your lifetime, you typically accumulate stuff, and when you die, the idea is, where's your stuff going to go? Is it going to go to the people I care about and love, or what's going to happen to it? Is it going to end up in the hands of the government via taxes? Is it going to end up with somebody I don't care so much about? And so the process of estate planning puts documents in place that dispose of your stuff at the time of your death. And so in one sense, it's an insurance policy where you put the documents in place and you have the peace of mind of knowing that there is a plan for what is going to occur. People don't like to think about dying. They like to think about living and being productive, particularly farmers and ranchers. They like to think about what the weather's doing and what the crop looks like and what next year, what equipment they need, et cetera. And they don't necessarily have time to think about the big picture. But the basic elements of an estate plan in Georgia are a will, a power of attorney that nominates somebody to act for me if I need it, if I'm incapacitated or if I'm out of town, and then a healthcare directive. If I'm in a car accident out here on 2nd Avenue and they rush me to the hospital, who's the person who's going to make decisions for me if I'm unable to do that? And who can the hospital look to or the medical facility look to be my person? And then, sadly, if I come to the point where I'm not going to make it, what degree of medical treatment do I want? We used to call that a living will, so some folks are familiar with that term. Now we do it all in something called an advance directive for healthcare in Georgia. So you want to have those three documents in the drawer. For younger families who say, well, I don't really have a lot of stuff yet. Do I need these documents? If you have children, the answer is yes. You need to nominate a guardian for your children if something were to happen to you and your spouse. That's the number one, most important. The money part is easy, but naming a guardian for your children is very important from that perspective. In the farming community, the stuff that you accumulate can involve real estate that you farm. It can involve structures commensurate with farming, barns and the like, silos. It can involve equipment to conduct farming operations. When farming operations get to a particular scale, there can be some wisdom in placing equipment in maybe an LLC, or putting land in an LLC. By that I mean just a company owned by you and your family, that provides liability protection in case there's an accident or something like that. Those are some of the basic elements to think about in the farming community when it comes to an estate plan, these documents that set forth what happens when you pass away.
Gotcha. So, the average age of a farmer is roughly around 60 years old. And according to the USDA, estimates suggest that about 40% of ag land in the U.S. could be in transition in the next 15 years, meaning that around 40% of the U.S. ag land would be transferred to the next generation. That's the estimate. So given that information, why is succession planning important to consider?
A variety of reasons. Some of it can be seen in this adage that we think about: if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. It's a little bit of a trite to say that. But when you work hard your entire life, you have something of a legacy that you've created, and there are ways to preserve that legacy. And putting something into place, going through a plan, having questions asked and answered about what would happen if you were to pass away in a sudden disaster or live the rest of your days out, what's going to happen with your legacy. And that can depend on a number of factors. The spouse in a sort of the non-farming spouse, of course it's all a family affair with a lot of farming families, but the care and comfort of the surviving spouse if someone were to pass away, what degree of care is needed, what medical care, nursing home care, things of that nature. And then when you talk about children who may be local to the farming operation, may have moved away, may have gone off to college somewhere and never come back home, or just doesn't want to come back. Some are interested in the farming operation, some are not. There's the general sense of fairness out there. How do I be fair to everybody in my family and sort of do the right thing by my kids, particularly if you have someone who's there and others who are not. And those are some of the questions that we ask and answer from a values perspective, that circles back into your legacy. What have you created over all these years? What values do you hold that are important? Do you want your grandchildren, great-grandchildren to be on this land? Do you care whether your children keep this land or not? There's no wrong answer, but knowing the answers are important to helping families put the right plan into place.
So how proactive do you think farmers and producers should be in this process? I feel like this is probably how it goes, most likely goes at least. I'll get to that later. Or, no, I don't have time for that right now. I'll do that later. How proactive should they be?
Well, it needs to be a natural conversation, not something that's forced. And so many times the patriarch or matriarch just needs to sit down and thoughtfully and prayerfully think, what do I want to do? What do I want to have happen after I die? What do I want this to look like? And it begins with that contemplation on the front porch, with a cup of coffee. What do I want this to look like when I'm gone? Because I know I'm going to be gone. And I have an opportunity now to set forth what happens rather than just pass away and, let the chips fall where they may. So what do I want to do? And then and that's where we can be helpful in stimulating those conversations and asking questions that are pointed, being direct about different cases we've seen over the years of different families and how they have handled and addressed different things, just as food for thought. So it really becomes a conversation before any action is taken to get to the values that drive the farmer or the landowner, that drives the legacy that the person wants to leave. So that's where it should start from a proactive stand. That can happen in the truck between here and there. That doesn't have to be formal. And then part two to that would be communication. That's the key to the kingdom. It's, whether that's a formal sit down with everybody at Thanksgiving or whether it's a one-on-one conversation with each child, there needs to be communication. Here's what I want to do. Here's what you can expect. Here's what I've been thinking. Some families get feedback from kids. A lot of times there are assumptions. I think child number one is going to want to do this. I think child number two is probably going to want to do, and you find out you're mistaken. And it's helpful to have a collaborative conversation like that. But it all begins with just taking the time to proactively just think about what I want to do. And that could be a 6 month to a year, one whole season it may take. But there's no deadline or timeline. It's just taking the time that you need to take to get to where you want to go.
So, you are a lawyer, obviously. You deal with this, I'm sure, often. What are some resources or what are some things that you think would be helpful maybe for producers or farm families that are thinking about a succession plan or maybe want to at least start this process?
That's a great question. There are a number of on-ramps to getting a plan into place, and it's not anything that is territorial for us, on the legal side. As long as an individual begins the process, it can happen by talking to us, and we're sort of a natural on-ramp to these conversations. It can happen by talking to a Farm Bureau representative, which has tremendous resources in this arena. It can begin by talking with a pastor or a neighbor or a family member or a cousin or somebody who's been through it, somebody at church or in the community who has had an aunt or an uncle pass away and has been through probate, knows what that's all about. It can begin, very naturally in that sense. But then a more formal way to engage would be to, contact an attorney who has experience working with families who own real estate, who conduct farming operations, who own small businesses. And we have to deal with these kinds of issues all the time and delve into the family psychology more often than not.
All right, last question for you. What is the most important thing to keep in mind as they start to formulate what this looks like for them and their future, as well as the future of their operation?
Yeah, great question. The thing that I've observed just in doing hundreds and hundreds of wills over the years is sometimes families will, patriarch and matriarch will make decisions, based upon what will not make someone upset with them. So the primary thing that I encourage people to keep in mind is this is a question of stewardship, and you're the boss. And sometimes your beneficiaries and your heirs just have to live with what your decisions are, based upon what you decide you want to do. Now, for some, the value component can include family harmony. I want to make decisions that will promote family harmony at the next generation, and I don't want to do something that will cause my children to never speak with each other again. And so many times that's a driving and motivating factor. But tied into you're the boss is there's really no wrong answer. Whatever patriarch and matriarch want to do with the farming operation is what they should do, motivated by whatever values they bring to the table.
All right, that's all I have for you, Brian. Is there anything that you want to say or add that I didn't ask or cover?
No, just for us, it's an honor to work with farming and ag families. They're some of the, if not the finest people that we get to work with. Many times they're so hard at work, on their operation, and they know that they're just one drought away from a rough stretch. And so that can be a limiting factor to coming to see a lawyer. You know, this idea that I've built something so sophisticated I have to go see a lawyer to, you know, it's almost like you're tempting fate if you do that. When in reality, we've talked about reasons why you would want to do that, and it ties into all the work you're doing in your operation is motivated by stewardship, having a plan in place as to what will happen when we lose you is another element of that same stewardship.
All right, Brian, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. You know, this obviously, as we discussed, this is not a topic that, you know, probably most want to talk about, but it is a necessary one. And so I hope at the very least they can take something away from this, you know, and maybe at the very least, you know, this helps get the ball rolling. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Growing On podcast. If you haven't done so already, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. That would be greatly appreciated. And as always, be on the lookout in the coming weeks for our next episode. Take care, everybody.